Apparently not.
You were muted, John.
Well, hi Dana, welcome to our Global Warming Committee. And
Hi.
I'm
Hi,
sorry
Dana.
that we can't.
Dana is our consultant from SAGE who helped us out with our with developing our GHG baseline. Dana will be assisting us in the presentation today. So welcome, Dana. Thank you.
Yes, welcome,
Thank
Dana.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I think it'll be an interesting discussion.
All right, I've got the recording going and everything.
All right. I'm calling the Global Warming Committee of West County Wastewater District Board to order at looks like 10:05 to me. Can you please do the roll?
Yes, I can. Chair Weiner,
Here.
Member Stanley,
Yes.
did we have any other? Sorry about my screen showing up.
I don't think we have any other directors present. I'm looking at the participant list, and looks like just Director Stanley and I.
Okay. We're now going to do a Pledge of Allegiance or observation of a moment of silence, please.
All
I
right.
pledge allegiance
I pledge allegiance to the flag
to
of
the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic
to the
for which
republic
it
for
stands,
which it stands,
one
One
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
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 liberty,
with liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
as possible. Next item, please.
The next item is approval of agenda order. Any member of the committee or board/board may request an agenda item be postponed, removed, or heard out of order. An item may not be added to the agenda unless it meets the requirements of an emergency situation as defined in Government Code Section 54956.5.
Director Stanley, have you any changes to the agenda?
No. Thank you.
I have
Do you want me to make a motion?
Sure.
I move that we approve the agenda order.
All right. Second and done.
Roll call. Chair Weiner.
I don't think we need to make a roll call since the
No
only.
roll call?
Yeah.
Okay, thank
Made
you.
the motion and seconded it, so I believe it's passed automatically.
Thank you.
And I don't know how many actual official motions need to be done. We can be very, I'm sorry, the word is not coming to me. We don't have to follow official protocol regarding meetings because there's only two of us, and we cannot, as a board, as a committee, pass any actions. We can agree, and I think a simple verbal agreement is all that's required.
Thank you very much.
Next item, please.
The next item is public comment. I did not receive any comments. Would you still like me to read the whole thing?
No, please. Thank you.
All right. The next item is the consent calendar. Matters of the consent calendar are considered routine and will be approved or recommended without discussion. Prior to approval or recommendation of the consent calendar, a member of the committee may request that an item be removed for discussion. If a member of the public would like to speak to an item on the consent calendar, the member should email the board clerk at my address prior to starting of the meeting. I did not receive any requests. Section A is the minutes. Approve/recommend board approval of the minutes of May 12th, 2020 Global Warming Committee meeting.
Director Stanley, how do you feel about that?
I'm okay to approve it.
All right, so do I. Minutes are approved.
Thank you. We now move on to discussion, and we're going to receive a report on West County wastewater's baseline inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. And Michael has the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I want to apologize to the presenters. I know that you went to a lot of trouble to get us a copy of the report, and due to current events, I haven't had have time to review the matter. So I will consider it in detail later, and I really appreciate that it has been done and will be presented to us this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Michael Savannah, Infrastructure and Planning Department Manager. I hope everyone is well. We are here today to present to do a presentation and present to this body the greenhouse gas report. Please excuse the fact that there's no item number on this presentation. I think we were having some problems with the one that we actually sent in, so this is the working copy that we sent. What is greenhouse gas or GHG baseline? GHG stands for our greenhouse gas, and the baseline inventory is essentially just a measure of our current emissions, and this reporting and calculation of our greenhouse gas is connected directly to the goal of becoming a carbon negative enterprise. One of the things that we have to do in order to become carbon negative is to understand where we are and calculate where we currently are, what our footprint is, so that we can put measures in place and calculate how much we're reducing, and we'll know when we've made it to our target, and we'll actually have a plan for getting to our target once we understand where we currently are. We brought in, through an RFP process, Sage Energy Consultants to do our greenhouse gas calculation and report for us. Sage Energy Consultants is an independent engineering firm or energy consulting firm that has done about 100 or so feasibility and energy studies in the last decade. They've led a number of large design design reviews and written the specs for a number of large scale projects. Dana, as I said earlier, is our lead consultant on the project, and she's here to talk us through the technical bits and answer any questions that you may have about how we calculated the greenhouse gas numbers, as well as what they actually mean and what's important, what's some of the industry standard, and what other folks are doing in terms of calculating their emissions. Over 15 years of experience in emission studies, so definitely well versed in the information that we're asking them to present here, and has done work for some very notable agencies in NASA, BACWA, and the California Energy Commissions. So with that, I'll ask Dana to step in and take over some of the technical bits here.
Thanks, Michael. One of my slides has those animations in it, so if you'll switch to the slideshow view for the next couple of slides, I think that'll be good. There's an icon at the lower portion of your screen, just to the left of the plus minus view sign. It looks like a little slideshow
Oops, my
screen,
apologies.
and if you click that,
don't understand.
Clearly, this is not what I do. Here you guys.
Well, okay.
Did you smudge before we had the meeting so that we could get rid of all the bad spirits?
Okay. Let me just give you a little bit more. So first, go up to the top where you see that yellow bar that says Protected View, and go ahead and enable editing there. Click that button.
Oh, I don't see any of that, Dana. What I see is the actual presentation mode. It's running the animations on my screen. If you guys see something different, then I'm not seeing that.
Right, I'm seeing the standard slide view with the.
Yeah, I don't think you're sharing that screen, Michael. The one.
My apologies, you all. Let's do this. New share. I'll just share my screen, and then I'll show you what I see.
There we go.
There you go.
All right, now we're in business.
That was the confusion.
Okay.
I was looking at this, and you were looking at something else.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I'll avoid reading all the words on this screen, but it's here for your reference. Greenhouse gas emission inventories are typically accounted and, if reported in different buckets. Scope 1 is meant to represent the bucket that West County Wastewater District has ownership and jurisdictional control over the emission sources that are in bucket number 1. These include pieces of equipment, wastewater treatment processes, things that happen on your facility with your equipment, and you have total control over what happens with those bits of equipment. Scope 2 represents indirect emissions that are also directly related to West County Wastewater District's operations, but are exclusively from purchased or acquired utility services. In West County Wastewater District's case, it's electricity. It's your utility electricity. So Scope 2, for your purposes, is exclusively that. And Scope 3 emissions are indirect emissions that are, again, related to your operations. West County Wastewater has influence over the emissions in this bucket, but they are really not in your realm of direct control or responsibility. So an example of that would be if you use a material and the emissions that are associated with manufacturing that material are included in the Scope 3 emissions, but it's not necessarily something that you are responsible for or have control over. Does this make sense so far? Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Do we consider the greenhouse, the methane generated while our inputs are still in the sewage systems? Do we have some guesstimate of what that might be?
Yes, and you're jumping ahead of me a little bit, so I'll get to that in a minute, and I'll answer that question in a minute.
All right, I'll be quiet. Thank you.
That's the fourth bucket consists of what we call biomass combustion or biogenic carbon dioxide. CO2 is short for carbon dioxide. And those are direct emissions, but they are part of the short-term global biological carbon cycle. And they're accounted for a little differently because they generally are considered not to have a real net effect on global climate change. And there's a reason for that, and I'll go to the next slide to show a little cartoon graphic to explain why the biogenic carbon emissions are different from the other kinds. So there are all kinds of gases in the atmosphere. some of which are greenhouse gases, some are not. So carbon dioxide over here on the left, that's a greenhouse gas. Methane over on the right, that's a greenhouse gas. It's actually a far more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and that'll be important in a minute. So if we step to the next, what happens is carbon dioxide, it gets taken during photosynthesis up from the Earth's atmosphere, becomes part of plants through photosynthesis, and through consumption, it becomes part of animal bodies and human bodies as well. And then we go to the next step. That material is either exhaled and respired. You breathe out CO2. It goes right back into the atmosphere. You may excrete it, and then it becomes the purview of the West County Wastewater District, and it becomes a collection of organic matter there. In the anaerobic digester, that organic matter is anaerobically processed, and those anaerobes turn the organic carbon in that organic matter back into a gas as methane, and then that methane is combusted. It returns right back to the Earth's atmosphere. So what you have here in all of these processes, photosynthesis, consumption, respiration, or excretion and combustion, it's all a closed loop back to the Earth's atmosphere with very recent carbon dioxide just circulating through Earth's biological systems. Other possible things that can happen, if we go to the next one, you could extract fossil carbon and combust it, and then it's released to the Earth's atmosphere, thereby creating a net positive. Or the material that was in the closed loop system can be converted to methane, which, as I said, is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And if we keep going, and you can see those are not part of the closed loop system, and they are accounted in those scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 buckets. But the biogenic carbon, because of its different way that it really has no net impact on the atmosphere, is accounted for differently. All right, so there's a little primer. So here's an overall summary of what the West County Wastewater District's emission inventory looks like. There are 4 major source categories in the legend: fuel combustion for transportation and equipment, that utility energy use, wastewater, the wastewater collection system, that is the sewer system that Mr. Weiner was asking about, and the wastewater treatment plant processes. There are those 4 buckets. The scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are added together and shown in the left, collection of bars. Scope 3, emissions that occur at other entities like manufacturers of your materials, that's the scope 3 one in the middle. And then that biogenic carbon or biomass combustion, that's the furthest to the right. If we break this down into a little bit further detail, we can really hone in on what are some of these bigger, more important sources of emissions. So right away, it jumps out that biogas combustion is the largest source of biomass combustion at the facility. When we go back over to the scope 1 and scope 2 on the left, our most significant categories are the storage of the biosolids in the sludge dewatering beds. Second is the residual nitrogen that goes into the effluent and is thought downstream to then be converted into a third greenhouse gas I haven't talked about yet, called nitrous oxide, which is yet another one of those high potency greenhouse gases. And then that third largest category is the sewer system. And I've distinguished the storage of the biosolids in the sewer system with the hash lines because as well as that in the middle, I've hashed the employees' work-home commute because these are categories that the West County Wastewater District is a little bit on the leading edge to include in their baseline inventory. The standard guidance that's been issued to local communities to estimate their greenhouse and report their greenhouse gas emissions typically doesn't deal with these emissions at all. But they probably should, and I've discussed it with some folks I know at Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and they actually agree with me, and they are going to, start looking into that question. There are some pretty good tools and information now available that weren't available at the time the guidance was written for estimating the emissions from the storage of biosolids. The emissions from the sewer system, that's a lot more uncertain and speculative. I base this estimate off of extrapolating from one peer review journal article. Continuing on to the smaller sources of emissions, if go back one more and I'll just wrap it up real quick. You see that utility energy use is broken up into natural gas use, 143 metric tons per year, and the electricity use, 237 tons per year. And then we have the vehicle fleets, both the West County Wastewater District fleet at 157 tons per year and the commuters, the employees. All right, and then I'll just close it out by asking any questions up to this point.
I do.
Okay, I think I'm supposed to hand it back off at this point.
Well, I
Is
have
that right?
questions.
Yeah.
I need you to, once again, the dark blue color, the storage color, right above it, what are those two?
Okay.
Or is that later?
Could you rephrase your question? I am not quite following you.
Okay, so effluent residential residual nitrogen, what is that?
Okay, so once the wastewater has been treated, there's a little bit of nitrogen remaining in the clean effluent wastewater that outfalls, I believe, at the bay. It is thought, according to guidance, that in the environment, that residual nitrogen is transformed by microbiological activity in the receiving waters, and that it is converted into a greenhouse gas called nitrous oxide. The chemical formula for that is N2O. And that's a natural process, but the N2O is a very potent greenhouse gas. And so a very tiny amount of nitrogen in the effluent can translate into a large greenhouse gas impact, as shown here.
Okay, and so then the storage of biosolids is our sludge beds, and then the sewer system thing that's just in our pipes, right?
Right, in the sewer collection system, that is methane that can be, a lot of these compounds are biologically mediated. So when you have any little stagnant pockets or things like that in the sewer collection system, you have the opportunity for anaerobic microbial activity to convert a little bit of the organic carbon in the sewage into methane gas. And you'll see over in the BC set of bars on the right, there's also a little bit of material coming from the sewer system. That's actually carbon dioxide, but it's biogenic carbon dioxide and part of that short-term carbon cycling.
Okay, and Dana, as you go through your presentation, are you going to tell us where we can the easiest change these numbers?
I am not. That is above my pay grade. I can offer some opinions as we go along, but I think right now our focus is to look at the, what the baseline inventory is telling us, how it summarizes, and then maybe, I can speculate as well as anybody else, but I think that is somebody else's purview. Sorry, make it short and long.
Thank you, Dana. And if I might jump in for a second, just to remind us all, the purpose of this is just to get the numbers and the baseline of where we are. We'll adjust our climate action plan, which will address how we actually move these numbers, and that's the next phase of what we're doing here, Director Stanley.
Okay, thank you.
Are you done, Director Stanley?
Yes.
So I had one question regarding your cartoon imagery showing the flows of carbon through the system, particularly the closed system. So in this case, it's human activity you're talking about, because we're eating and defecating, and that's part of the natural flow of carbon through humans. But my question is it possible for us to recreate the part of the closed system where oxygen is created from carbon dioxide by the natural environment, particularly plants who take in the sun and make carbon their bodies, and then exhale during the day. They exhale the oxygen, and fundamentally the Earth's atmosphere, the oxygen content of the Earth's atmosphere was produced by a net gain once photosynthesis evolved. And so I guess one of the things that I'm wondering about in our process is there any way for us to, and this is just speculation, but since this is kind of like we're formulating the basis for our moving forward by understanding how this process works and how we're getting our carbon budget. Would it be possible to, is there anybody or any research that shows using algae, for example, to produce oxygen by feeding the water with the CO2 generated by the other aerobic bacteria? Is there any process that anybody does like that, where we could produce carbon bodies as we do, from the waste? We could also produce it from the CO2 and then put that in our digesters and produce extra energy to power the plant and reduce our dependence on outside sources. I know it's just speculation, but it's a part of nature that we are not marshaling to right now.
I think you're asking if there's a way to enhance the photosynthesis process to uptake more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and incorporate it into plant matter, and in that way create a net sink of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Right.
And ways to do that include planting a forest, and another opportunity is represented by that organic matter that is in the sludge drying beds. There's a lot of carbon there, and some of it's getting converted to methane. If there is a way to instead have that methane going to the carbon dioxide endpoint, then you're moving emissions from your scope 1 bucket into that biogenic CO2 or biomass combustion bucket.
Thank you.
So I'll ask John to step in and help us out with the highlights if there's no other questions on what Dana has presented.
Well, thank you, Michael. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I think my job is to bring some of the really technical information that was presented to a generally accessible level and talk a little bit about the highlights of the presentation thus far. One of the items we wanted to highlight is that the largest source of emissions relates to the biosolids storage lagoons, and the study shows that approximately 31% of emissions in scope 1 and 26% in scope 2 are from that source. And we do have some fugitive emissions with respect to the system. Those emissions are typically the CH4 and CO2 from the wastewater collection systems. That issue is an emerging science issue, and it really isn't fully quantified, and it isn't accounted for, I think, in a lot of the studies, and perhaps Dana can circle back and comment on that a little bit. I think it is a squishier part of the presentation and the calculations than some of the work Dana did, which is based on more solid and established metrics. And again, I would invite her to comment on that one a little bit more as we move through. In terms of electricity,
Got it right.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. In terms of electricity, about 6% of the GHGs are associated to that in the study, which gives us a little bit of an opportunity, obviously, and you were asking what we can do about the numbers. That's an area that certainly is one we would concentrate on. Fleet WCW vehicles and equipment estimated at 4% of our baseline. That's going to be a tougher nut to crack. Again, we're not talking there about employee commute emissions, where there's an alternative and a variety of strategies that we could look to implement. And Dana, I'm going to ask you to confirm that those are scope 3 emissions in terms of a calculation if they are included, as opposed to a scope 1 or scope 2. But in terms of the fleet, there isn't an immediate alternative to our fuel purchases available in the marketplace, although technology is moving in that direction, and I would expect in the next few years that there will be options that the district could consider to move away from traditional fuel sources for the equipment that we need to have. And then on-site energy projects, the important thing about that point is that we are capturing biogas, we are capturing methane, and we are converting that and flaring some of it still at this point. That is a benefit to our GHG baseline, because not doing that would cause us to have greater problems. And then the final point on that one is our existing PV systems at the plant, which are generating power for us, are also a net reduction in emissions. So our baseline, if we were not flaring some of our methane, if we were not utilizing more of our methane in terms of running the engine-driven blowers, and if we didn't have our PV systems, our baseline would be significantly higher than it is today. And I think the important takeaway about that is our baseline would be higher, and we would have opportunities that we don't currently have because you've implemented them. So the district finds itself where it is based on the initiatives it's already undertaken, and we have to move from where we are with some of what I would call the lower hanging fruit already having been picked, if you will, leaving us with increasingly more challenging or difficult choices as we try to move towards carbon net negative or carbon neutral status as an organization. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Michael for a discussion of some of the next steps, and thank you.
Thank you, John. And I think a couple of points that I'd like to add to the highlights are two things that, or one thing that Dana pointed out in this presentation, and one thing that I believe we pointed out in our carbon negative definition presentation. With all of the things that the district is planning to do and has goals to do, and we're moving forward with, we now have a GHG baseline, which has some components of it which are industry leading in terms of the ways that we've calculated our emissions and some of the things that we've chosen to incorporate in our calculation. And we also have a goal of being carbon negative sooner than anyone else that we were able to talk to when we were doing our research. So I think we need to keep in mind that we have some very ambitious goals, and we're shooting for them, and we'll need to, you know, just sort of keep in mind that we're very ambitious here with the things that we're looking to do. And we should be proud of our ambition, and it's pushing us to do some things outside of the box and be innovative about the ways that we're reaching those goals. Next steps after this presentation, there are a number of things that we'll be evaluating in a number of different ways. There's the biosolids and how we're drying our biosolids at the plant and what we're doing with them. There's the cogen feasibility and whether or not that's right for the district. And there's the solar that we are proposing or potentially proposing with one of the energy projects that we're looking at doing, some energy efficiency upgrades in the district, potential electric vehicles and additions of electric vehicles to our fleet, and reductions in employee commutes. These are all ways in which we envision being able to lower our footprint or reduce our footprint. A number of these will be captured in the proposed NG project that, or ESCO project that may be coming forward really soon. And I'd invite any questions that you guys have about any of these specific components at this time.
Director Stanley?
I'll go after you, Harry. I'm still thinking.
Okay, that's more than I'm doing. I would like to, first of all, thank Michael for his vote of confidence in the district and his enthusiasm for moving on this very difficult goal set, as John has pointed out, many years in the future. And I also want to thank the district, engineering, and everybody involved for prioritizing things by cost as well. I mean, using cost as one of your major evaluators for picking the projects to do up front. It is really important that whatever we do, we focus on the cost. But if we have the latest information and we have modified our plans for moving on this goal in our pockets, when and if sanity reigns and our nation begins to understand the true emergency of global warming, we might find resources available that don't have to come from our ratepayers to implement the plan. And I think one of the big things that we can do in our minute spare time is to become politically active and push our federal representatives to recognize that we have a global emergency and we we need to move on. Thank you very much for the presentation so far.
Okay, so I know what my questions are.
Please
If
go
I
ahead.
may. So, Michael, on this next steps, these are things that you're going to evaluate. Are you considering, or have you even thought about the thought of composting as one of the things that we do?
I don't know that we've had significant amount of consideration into composting and where that would lead us in regards to our reduction of greenhouse gases. So I don't know that we've put any significant level of investigation into that, but that's definitely something that we can add to this list of things that we evaluate as we're looking at a plan for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions footprint.
Well, okay. I'm going to suggest, Chairman Weiner, that we ask that this gets added to the list just so that we have considered everything.
I think that's a great idea. I think that John would, if John would kind of rationalize the addition, in other words, make the focus greenhouse gases and how, how that would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions or help us get to net negative, since we're taking carbon and putting it into green matter by having compost. I don't know whether there are studies showing the amount of sequestration that occurs from planting trees, mentioned by our expert.
I'd invite Dana if she'd like to say something about that. Certainly, there is a study of the effect of composting and agriculture with respect to sequestration. But I think we may have an opportunity in terms of the sludge drying and the soil amendment Class A materials that are created as a result of the drying process that's currently being evaluated, that would, I think, maybe take us to where Director Stanley was going. I believe we'll be hearing more about that when we get the initial recommendations from the ENGIE ESCO project that is being planned to be brought forward to the district in some form or fashion, at least as a report, sometime this summer. So I think you'll be hearing more about that. And Director Stanley, if you would like to get a little bit more into the details about what you're envisioning on the composting, I'd be happy to try to take a look at that, and perhaps Dana will have some thoughts at this point.
Well, would you like me to tell you what I'm thinking right now or offline? Well, I just keep remembering the video that the city of Santa Rosa put out of how they compost their biosolids, and they suck the methane gas out of their building and they put it down under the ground, and by the time it filters up, it's gone. It's been sequestered into the earth. So I like that simple process, and I'm probably oversimplifying what I recall. But it made their method of heating their material while they were composting it took care of any toxicities that we were concerned about, and metals, I believe. And so we ended up with a clean product, and as far as I could tell, they were greatly reducing any gas that's being released out in the atmosphere. So those were things that caught my attention, and I just would like it to be part of the evaluation so that if it's too expensive, fine. If it's doable, fine. You know, just how much is it going to cost?
Thank
You
you for that,
understand,
Director
John?
Stanley.
Yes, thank you.
Anything else, Director Stanley?
No, thank you.
Again, thank you all for your work on this and your time. I appreciate that, and the committee. Speaking for you, Director Stanley, we appreciate it.
Quite all right.
Thank you. And if there are no more questions, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you so much.
You're muted.
Next item.
And could somebody please send us the slides that we had during this presentation?
Sure.
I think you're muted, Gina. I think you're muted.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. Number 6 is matters from staff/general manager, and point A is reports on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee.
Are there any?
Chairman Wiener, I don't have any additional matters for today, just on future agenda items, which we could talk about on the next item if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on.
Number 7 is matters from members of the board. A, reports on issues pertaining to the work of the committee.
Director Stanley?
I'm just reminding people that Andrew is going to be on a webinar at noon, isn't it? About the levy that we're doing and resilient by design.
What is that, the Bay Area Coalition?
So that will be today at noon?
That's correct. It'll be Contra Costa County, Urban Tilth, myself. It's the 2-year, what do they call it? The 2-year anniversary of the Resilience by Design, and so it's a webinar presentation with a panel. It's I'd have to go look at the actual group. I think it's is it the Bay Area Coalition that was putting it on? I cannot recall.
I think we got a website to go to.
Yeah, and I made the announcement on that at the board meeting. I don't have my note in front of me. I have my Zoom link. I know what to click on, but which it gets a little confusing. There's the multitude of the overlapping organizations, from the San Francisco Estuary Project to the Restoration Authority, and many of the same staff members are part of these variety of these different organizations. So I get a little confused that way. Sorry.
I just hope they send us money.
Well, that's what we're talking about today. So far, the Restoration Authority's committed to $644,000 to the preliminary planning, and I guess if we're ready to go to 7B, that's what I can talk about next.
Okay.
I do not have any reports on matters pertaining to the work of the committee.
Are we going to future then?
Yes, number B is letter B is future agenda items and informal observation and inquiries regarding the business of the district or requests for placement of items of interest on a future agenda.
Well, I would like to know anyone's thoughts. I would like somebody, some consultant type, who seeks out grants and money, as you just mentioned, Director Weiner, about, shouldn't we have somebody looking for money for us for this levy and whatever else we want to do? Anybody's thoughts?
Don't we, I think we do have attention aid to that matter. I don't think we have a formal position, but I get the impression that the district is keeping their eyes out for funding.
Well, I can respond to that a little bit. It's not actually an agenda item here, but a future agenda item, what I'm recommending is that next meeting, what we can talk about is the status of the grant from the Restoration Authority for the preliminary design, the conception, the planning and preliminary design for the living levy and the work with the stakeholder groups. Part of that grant application is we are going to be taking a look at what other grant sources, whatever funding from the Army Corps of Engineers, from FEMA, from whoever else we may be able to find some funding for. We'll be looking at what we can leverage from other partners, if we can get those partners. There is money available in Measure AA through the Restoration Authority for construction as well. But before we're in a position to be able to go for any of that additional funding, we've got to go through this preliminary planning and design process so that we have something that we can go out seeking money for. Nobody will fund us at this stage of it. It's quite fortunate that we're able to get this kind of money already for planning. Don't usually get it for this level at this stage. A lot of this usually has to happen and then you bring something forward. But that's the process. It's going to take us a while to get ourselves to the next stage, but we will be, as part of this process, having those ongoing conversations and keeping our eye out for the various options.
Anything else, Director Stanley?
Okay. Well, we're still talking about future agenda items, and what has me, I think about this funding issue often, Andrew, and plus because I watched last week's Resilient by Design thing, and it just so happened to be talking about racial justice as it was looking back on what it started 2 years ago and and where we're going, and it's so current right this second. And I thought that it might be nice to see if we can get a copy of that or have it sent to us to prepare for a meeting sometime in the future, because some of how we're going to sell getting more money, more funding in the future, we're uniquely set up to being asking for social justice type monies because we serve historically disadvantaged neighborhoods. So just, I'm not phrasing this well. I wasn't prepared. Sorry, but do you understand where I'm going?
No, I understand what you're talking about, and that's a component of our grant application, the current one, and that will be a component of our future grant applications as well. Generally, the pots of money you're talking about there for those types of grants are nowhere near the kind of dollars we're looking for actual construction. They're usually a lot of planning and for outreach and educational programs, et cetera. But that could change. We'll see.
Okay. I'm done.
Thank you, Director Stanley. I was going to move on the same path that you began, and I think I'll address that. what we are, again, historically it's been presented to us and currently it's being presented to us, is we have governments, we as governmental agencies have built in a certain amount of racism. And it's clear that even though the nation addresses the issue every 50 years or so, it backslides. And so I feel like we, as an institution, need to build in anti-racism and the recognition that racism can become an operating thing within any governmental agency. And I know that our focus isn't on, I mean, we don't have a police force and we don't directly have any tools to affect the greater society. I think in this case, focusing our, at least big part of our thinking in the Global Warming Committee is on environmental justice. And so I'm glad that Director Stanley brought that up. And so I think we need as a district to, I don't know, have a policy, you know, make policy so that some, that backsliding can't occur, and we don't move into a place of business as usual where injustice is just part of business as usual. And so I really appreciate you bringing it up, and I'm hoping that we can think hard as a district on how we can do our part, not only for the environment, but for the environment of all of our citizens. And that's all I have to say on future agenda items. I'd like to see us work on an item that addresses all that.
Thank you.
Any other comments by anybody else? This would be the time. Okay, then I think next item, please.
Next item is adjournment, and it is 11:03.
All right, we are adjourned, and thank you all for attending. And I really do, I love these meetings. I mean, I know they're a pain to everybody, but to me, they are really us doing good work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.